Hi, everybody. This is Tom Broussard. It is Tuesday, October 19th. Glad to see everybody. It's a beautiful day outside here in Maine. Um, it's always interesting whenever I make these presentations. I wonder if you guys are just getting bored, maybe. I mean, you still have lots of likes. Um, but I know that all I really talk about is stroke and aphasia and recovery, although for most of what I still do, leads me to it. It isn't like I just had stroke and aphasia first time in my whole life, of course, but that's all I really remember. I remember lots of things that led up to my stroke and aphasia and led on to where I'm going to go from here. So hopefully I'll continue to show you some stories that doesn't necessarily always include stroke and aphasia, although most of the time it does. I did talk to you about the Navy quite a bit. Again, there's always good, funny stories that still have a way of connecting between stroke, aphasia, and submarines, as it were, and COVID, as it were. I talked before about John McCain when he was the president, when he was the president, yeah, when he wanted to be, when he was the senator. But before that, we built a ship here in Bath called the McCain. And Senator McCain came up and was here for the commissioning. And I got to work with him and his staff for several months getting ready for that. So I wrote an article about McCain as well. Now that Colin Powell has passed, which is a sad day, I am sure, I'm going to write an article fairly soon about Colin Powell. And again, it's not like you're going to hear me talk about stroke and aphasia all the time. But if I have people I've met over my life, and Colin Powell happens to be one of them, I did get to meet him about 25 years ago, and I've only met him a couple times. But I'm going to write an article soon about him, and again, how any number of people helps create who we are on any given day. And as you remember the remembrance of all of that, it helps you remember such that when the next day comes and something else is in trouble, something else is wonderful to see. But otherwise, still have to make all these course corrections going forward. Not like you're going to some one place and you're going to stay there for the rest of your life, but actually being able to adopt to your life going forward, no matter what the reasons might be or the experiences might do. So I'm going to write about Colin Powell soon, just so you know when I get done here today. This one is very interesting. This is titled Stroke and Aphasia Recovery, This Thing Called Aphasia. It's always been interesting that this thing called aphasia is basically what people find out when they've been told they have aphasia. They go, what is this thing called aphasia? And that happened with me too. As you know, I had my stroke in Boston about 10 years ago. Got to the hospital, got the drug that keep my body from being paralyzed, and woke up a couple days after the event at the hospital, and I thought everything looked fine. Of course, I was being told, not to say that I really understood what I was being told, but they did tell me I could walk around the floor, and as I walked, I kept seeing other people, obviously, that were in trouble with accidents and strokes and severe issues. And I kept looking at them and then looking at me and saying, why am I here? I don't understand. Of course, I'm saying all that. Who knows what they actually heard me say? And maybe I was just talking to myself. But I was told on that Thursday that I was assessed as aphasia. They told me that. I had no idea. I didn't even know that the therapist in front of me was who that person was. I really couldn't remember it. But over weeks, I got to understand it, being told by my wife and by the nurses and the materials that I had this thing called aphasia. But it's interesting because when you have aphasia, one of the issues, the deficits are that you don't know what you don't know. So you can be told that you have these things, including this thing called aphasia, but if you don't know what you don't know, you really don't know. And that was the case with me as well as most of my friends who have aphasia. It's gradual. as you begin to better understand what the world is now in front of you that wasn't the world you had experienced before, and finally come to realize about this thing called aphasia. Um, but in my particular case, I didn't realize just what a transition all of this would be. Um, but as I began to think back in my memory of other transitions I had gone through in my life, I began to see that this was, I'll say, nothing more nor less, sometimes more, sometimes less, of having a stroke and aphasia. So, so for example, when I was with the Navy, I loved going to sea. That's what I always wanted to do since I was young. Go to the Naval Academy and go to sea. I was on a destroyer for 3 years, and then went into from as an engineer, then converted to supply corps school. I became a supply officer on a submarine. That was also very cool. I loved it a lot. Um, I went into a submarine tender from there, and then to shore duty, and then left the Navy and went into, turns out, into shipbuilding of one kind or another, and ended up at the Bath Iron Works in Bath, Maine, building ships, building destroyers for the Navy. And I ended up being the director of mechanical engineering and design. Um, that's a transition for sure, because I'd been sailing ships. Now I was building ships. I liked both of those things. I do like the sea in any number of its offering. And but after a couple more years, I began to realize that what I was really doing, and I had several hundred employees, what I was really doing was building what I now call shipbuilders. So clearly, I wasn't building the ships. All my employees were helping build that ship. And I knew as I grew that I was building shipbuilders. I was helping educate everybody who worked for me. And at that point, I shifted again. I changed again to education and employment. Started my company, Career Prospects, did that for 15 years here in Southern Maine, and doing the same kind of thing, helping people understand how we learn and how we can get better when it comes to employment, because everybody has to have a job. And as that went by, I realized that I needed more tools, more research tools, and I went to the Hello School at Brandeis University while still running Career Prospects. And I was there for 6 years, 2 years full-time in Waltham, and then 4 more years doing the research and writing my dissertation. Another transition. Again, although I went through those transitions over all those years, I never really had any conscious understanding that, oh, you are doing this on purpose, as if, of course, it was on purpose, and I had some motive to it, but it wasn't the same as what I now know as I go back and look at those memories and realize, oh, the common denominator was the constant change and the transition from one, quote, one thing to another, and then finally hopping into this thing called aphasia. But as that went through, I graduated with my PhD. I still didn't figure out what I was going to do next in terms of what the big research question would be, because when you have a PhD, that's what you're there for, is to do some kind of big study. But at Career Prospects, I was doing an awful lot of work helping people with disabilities find work and employment. So I ended up doing workforce development and disability studies at the Hello School. And I was always thinking along those lines without really coming to any other conclusion. But I went to Vassar for a semester and then came back to the Hello School as the associate dean. And I was there for 5 years until I had my stroke. So another transition, again, completely accidental, that I had converted again to have somebody who had lost my language and had to get it back. And that was another transition. Now, the next transition, if I may say, is helping educate the wider public about aphasia, because you will never know unless you or your family or friends have stroke and aphasia. And for the most part, that's pretty much the bubble that we all live within. So what I now do, my role now, is to help with this transition, to educate people about aphasia. When I left my hospital, I was given one piece of paper, and it said lots of other things on there, but it had one line that said aphasia is this language disorder. and I got a prescription to go to a rehab facility a month from now because it's going to take a while before you're stable. And that was another transition that needs to be done. And that's really the baton that hospitals, who really do what they do to make people get better, stabilize who they are, and then move them, move them to another facility. In many cases, people like us, we go to a rehab facility. But that's a baton that is usually dropped because this part of the bubble, the hospital, they do what they do. Good. Here they are. Good luck. And the rehab knows a lot about it. That's what they do. That is their role. And they don't really realize that the baton is us. And when we leave with them, we don't know anything about this thing called aphasia until we show up over here and then start working as if you always knew something about aphasia because you came through the door with aphasia. So it's not like what happened yesterday or last week or last month. How did you become who you are today? That is a large part of how you're going to be who you will be after. So that too is not only my transition, but what I'm trying to do too with the hospital and the healthcare community is better understand this continuum of life, really, that allows each of these different bubbles to at least become aware that they need to conduct the movement from one baton to the next, to the next, to the next going forward, and at least having the person that is the baton to remember what it looked like from one runner to the next runner going forward again. So all of this comes together for me to begin to understand that as I realized that my aphasia turned out to be my big research question from the Heller School. They had no idea, neither did I, that this was it. This is why I am who I am today. This is what I need to do today. And I couldn't have gotten this without having everything that came before. Had to have that stroke. Not that anybody wants it. I don't want it. I don't want anybody to have it. But once you have it, you have to deal with it, right? So it is my gift. And I got it. As I get better, now I can help explain to others what I couldn't express before. And that is a big deal when there are very few people who know anything about aphasia anyway, never mind be able to understand what had happened through these various transitions and realize that the larger community and the wider public need to know more about aphasia from the beginning to the end, because if you have you want to learn something new, this transition, this education isn't just because you have aphasia and have to get better. It is because you are perfectly healthy and want to get more healthy still with the new language, a new job, a new experience. It still requires plasticity, which is what makes the brain work. And we all have to understand that. Even as simple as some of these principles are, as simple as they are still incredibly powerful to know what they are from the people, whether you're healthy or not. So as this went forward and beginning to realize that 30 to 40% of people with stroke acquire aphasia, I also began to realize that the brain injury community, I just really didn't know. I thought that they were in a different group, a different bubble, and that the people with aphasia are in another bubble. And when I came to Maine, back to Maine, I contacted the people in the government to find out anything about brain injury and aphasia, stroke, and found out these groups that they had lots of people who do it, and they do like to have people with stroke and aphasia. So I volunteered to do all kinds of things, and was really liked meeting many other people with additional brain injuries that aren't necessarily with aphasia, but it all comes from the common denominator of brain injury of one kind or another. And they all require any number of factors, including the principles of plasticity, which is, again, how the brain works, especially when it's what they call acquired stroke, like a stroke or a concussion or an accident of one kind or another. Last week, I was lucky enough. I wrote a paper for the states and nationals Brain Injury Association of America, the Maine chapter. I wrote a paper for that, And a couple months ago, they called me back and said, would you like to be the annual Beverly Bryant Memorial Lecture for their annual conference? And I said, yes. And I conducted the lecture. It would have been face to face in Portland, Maine, but a couple of weeks ago, they said, no, it's got to go back to um, uh, uh, on Zoom. And I presented last week entitled this thing called aphasia, um, uh, basically helping them understand how it works from a person with stroke and aphasia. And I really enjoyed the conference staff who were taking care of me, as it were, getting ready for my presentation and getting ready for the logistics of the conference. And I fully enjoyed that, and now realize that another transition for me is to now find my way into the brain injury that isn't focused just on stroke and aphasia, but realizing that the larger brain injury community includes aphasia and may very well be able to use some of the principles of plasticity that might just happen to come from aphasia and recovery that can help other people too, no matter where they are in that continuum of health recovery for people with brain injury. I was happy to get to this position, to have that lecture, which is quite an honor for me, and I really appreciate that, and I have to continue to tell them that because I didn't know much about my world in their world, and I did show them what I've been working on for the last 6 years with 300 presentations, 30 states, and over 10,000 people in my audience going forward with 4 books and my 5th year. The one quote that I want to read to end this presentation is another person written in the late 1800s and early 1900s, who also is another person who knows a lot about the brain. And he is the one who coined the word synapses, which is the leaves of any metaphorical photosynthesis metaphor for plasticity, the leaves being the learning field for the synapses. It is incredibly difficult to heal a damaged brain using the same damaged brain both as the tool and the tiller that is needed to steer to calmer waters. I learned from both people with aphasia and speech therapists that knowing oneself takes on a whole new perspective on brain injury. No more remarkable than that the boat obeys the handling of him who sails it. And that's what we have to do, is we have to continue to be aware of the boat, how to sail it, and knowing that we are the ones at that tiller. The people with the brain has to use the brain we have to actually drive and move and steer us to a better place. The doctors and clinicians do a tremendous job providing us with all the tools we need. But at the end of the day, as the therapists always say, it's even here in this article, the 5 rules of recovery for all of us: motivation, practice, 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 practice. So it takes this huge team, but believe it or not, the captain of that boat is still us. So thank you very much for hearing me. This is a longer presentation. I have several more coming up in the next couple of months, but I do enjoy talking with you and bringing you in to understand that we are more than just the community of stroke and aphasia, now continuing to encompass any and all other brain injury in the community, as we all try to figure out what it means to be able to steer to calmer water. Nice to see everybody. Have a good weekend coming up, and I will see you in a couple more weeks. Take care of yourselves. Bye-bye.